For those of you who have not met me, those of you who walked in a little after, didn't hear me introduce myself earlier, I'm Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here at Mount Zion Baptist Church, and I want to apologize in advance. If it seems like I'm kind of dragging, it's because I've slept about 8 or so hours in the last 4 days. I got in last night at midnight to the Raleigh airport from a wedding that I was doing on short notice, and then I actually got to my house at about 1:30 because the only person I could get me to pick me up on Lyft had a Tesla that he had to stop at a Sheetz and charge up for like 20 minutes. The Lyft app was like sending me notifications. They were like, "Are you being kidnapped? Yes or no?" And I was like, "I think no. Time will tell." Evidently it was not. But I got a donut. The Sheetz donuts are really good, right? But so yeah, if I seem like I'm dragging, it's because I've slept 1 full night's sleep in about 4 days. So right now the only thing keeping me upright is caffeine. Or if I seem like I'm kind of wired, it's because I've only slept 8 hours in the last 4 nights and I've got a whole lot of caffeine keeping me weirdly upright. But whatever the case, I'm glad to be here and I'm glad to see you guys. I've got a little bit of a curveball for you this morning, though. This is not the sermon that I wrote, edited, practiced, and spent this past week fully intending to preach this morning. That one is going to have to wait for a couple of weeks for a really simple reason. It's because over the past few weeks, we sent out a call to all of the fathers connected to our church. We put it on social media, sent it out in our mass messaging and so forth to get a little bit of insight from the fathers in our church. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Your years as a father are a gold mine of wisdom, whether you realize it or not. Know what I'm talking about? A lot of the fathers here do not know what I'm talking about, but the mothers who have lived with him are like, yes, I know what he's talking about. You are better than you think you are, my man. That's why I married you, right? But in the lead up to Father's Day, we asked you to share your Father's Day stories. We said, share your experiences as a father, the lessons that you've learned, the wisdom that you have to share from your time in fatherhood, the ways the Lord has helped you and taught you through it all, and what you would want a new father or an expectant father to know. And you guys shared some really incredible things in response. We got so many incredible insights over the past couple of weeks, and I planned originally to share them at the beginning of the service before moving on to the rest of what I had planned. But the same thing happened with the Father's Day questionnaire that happened with the Mother's Day questionnaire, and that is that we got so many deep, so many rich, unbelievably valuable bits of wisdom from your responses that just reading off the responses in order without me even adding anything to them pretty much became a mini sermon of its own, and frankly, a better one than I wrote. And so, what we want to do this morning is what we should have done a month ago. I want to make this the one big focus of our time today. Because the fatherly wisdom that you shared with us in the weeks leading up to this actually tells a really beautiful story. I don't have any slides for you because this was a very last minute change, but bear with me. Pretend there were slides up there. I want to talk a little bit about that really beautiful story that your responses to our questions about fatherhood tell this morning. Sound good? The first thing we learned as we read through what you shared with us is that there's a whole lot of things you wish you would have known earlier in your life as a father, right? There are so many hard things you did not expect, that you wish you would have known earlier in your life as a father. Here's a handful of the things that you've shared with us. One, you said, nobody tells you just how hard it is to balance work life and home life. Is that true or is that true? You said the strain of supporting my family financially and supporting them emotionally is often like getting pulled in two directions at once by a pair of opposite forces that are not going to stop pulling until they rip us in half. You recognize that in your own life? Of course you did. You're the one who told us. You said, I was not prepared for how hard it is to balance work life and home life. Number two, you said, learning to let our children become who God created them to be, instead of trying to shape them into what we want, has been so much harder than I ever expected. Know what I'm talking about? I don't yet. Mine's only 9 months old. But you do. There is nothing harder than letting go of that control, that desire to be able to make sure things go the way we want them to make sure our kids grow up into the kind of people they need to make sure our kids grow up to live a happy life by taking the right path instead of the wrong path, to make sure they honor the Lord, to make sure they grow into somebody who helps others instead of harms others, and on and on and on. You wrote, I've been learning through the years that I have no control over that, and that has been unbelievably painful. That's a direct quote. You said it goes against everything in my nature to just do my best and allow the Lord to work through it, to form them into whatever He created them to be, except that even with all my best efforts, He is still the one who is ultimately in control. I wish I would have learned that earlier in my fatherhood life. That's number two. Number three, you said living through seasons where our children are not with us has been so much harder than I ever could have predicted. For some of you, you talked about the pain of losing children to death, having to bury your children. Some of you talked about losing your children when they've grown up, gone a very different path, and walked away from your family. Some of you talked about the pain of losing children through separation and divorce, custody battles, the inevitable distance that grows between you in the process, because this year they're with you, next year they're with her, this weekend they're with you, next weekend they're with her. You said that no matter how much you tried, you couldn't avoid the situation where your time with them is cut in half at best, and with that comes pain. You said, I never expected fatherhood to come with so much heartbreak. That's number three. Here's number four. You said one of the most difficult things about fatherhood is how often it feels like you're flying blind, having to figure out the way to go on the fly because nobody taught you how to be a father. Just reading through your responses, something became really clear. Some of you were absolutely blessed with fathers who modeled faithfulness, who planted seeds that still influence you today, or you were blessed with grandfathers whose example still guides you today, that you were able to figure out the right answer in so many of the forks in the road throughout your life just by imitating them. You could point to your human father. You could point to your grandfather. You could point to your stepfather. You say, I wish my mom would have met you like 11 years ago and you would have been my father. You can point to your friend's father who just said, okay, you're over at my house about 60% of the time anyway, so I'm going to take you fishing and teach you how to change a tire and also how not to grow up to be an abuser and so on and so forth, right? You can point to all of these father figures that you can imitate today, and it's been a major blessing. And yet at exactly the same time, for so many of you, it was exactly the opposite you said. For so many of you, you wrote that you grew up without a single healthy example to follow. Some of you wrote about growing up neglected by your human father. Some of you wrote about growing up abandoned by your human father. So many of you wrote about growing up abused by your human fathers. You got plenty of examples of what not to do. Plenty of examples of the kind of men who really ought to just go die in a hole. That's actually nicer than the way that quite a few of the Psalms put this. But that you grew up surrounded by men who would probably honestly have been better for you if they'd gotten hit by a bus. Spent the rest of their life comatose while you raked in the insurance money. Then they did awake and conscious and able to pour out their poison on you in new ways with each passing year. You said, I had no one I could look to for guidance. That's an unbelievably hard place to be. You said so much of fatherhood has been so much harder than I could ever have imagined. And because of all these things, you said you've had to let go of a lot of expectations. Know what I'm talking about when I say that? This was one that was very similar in the motherhood questionnaire we did a month ago. But for so many of you, you said you have had to let go of so many of the expectations society has placed on you as a father. Because our culture does place so many expectations on fathers, not unlike the way they place so many on mothers. It's not a competition. We don't have to do that. But think about it for just a sec. You know, if you work too much, they say you are never around for your kids. If you don't work enough, they say you're not supporting your kids. If you are too hard and stoic and you never show your emotions, they say you're not emotionally available. If you are too open and sensitive with your emotions, they say you're a crybaby, man up. If you go to all your kids' baseball games, the people see you and they say, why do you have so much time to be at all these games? Shouldn't you be at work? If you don't show up to all your kids' baseball games, they say you're an absentee father. If your marriage comes to an end, they assume it must be mostly your fault. If you stay with the mother and there's constant tension and the environment is terrible, they say, why doesn't he just take responsibility and end it so everybody can breathe easy? If you don't try to lead your family in some kind of family worship or Bible study, they say he's not doing the work to pass his faith on to his kids. If you do lead your family in some kind of worship or Bible study, they say he's indoctrinating his kids. Eventually, you just kind of throw up your hands and say, yeah, sorry for existing. You tell me what to do and then I'll do it. And then they tell you what to do and then you do it. And then they say, oh no, not like that. The expectations are impossible. It is a waste of time to try to meet them. In one response after another, we saw the same thing happening. You said, I've had to let go of the expectation that I can be perfect, that I can get it all right, that I can figure it all out, that I can catch all the things I need to catch, that I'm going to accomplish all the things that I want to accomplish, that I can do all the things people think I should be doing, that I can juggle all those things that people think I should be juggling, that I can control all these circumstances that are completely out of my control, that I can thread that impossible needle of being fully present and being a provider and being a protector and being a teacher and being a fighter and being this and that and this and that, of being every single thing in the world and somehow also being absolutely nothing. So I leave no trace, take up zero space, don't get in anybody's way until they want me to. I had to let go of all these expectations that popped up over and over and over in your responses. So that I had to accept that I cannot be everything everyone thinks they need me to be, and that's okay. What it made me think of as I was reading your responses was Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 12:9. Paul says, "The Lord said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in your weakness." My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. Now, we're not going to spend 20 minutes deep diving into all the background context of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, but here's the big thing we need to know. Here's why this is what this reminded me of. It's because in 2 Corinthians, Paul is facing a task he is not capable of doing on his own. Paul is trying to wrangle a church together that is seemingly beyond repair. The church is walking away from him for a handful of reasons, and the big reason is because he is not very good at almost any of the things that you are supposedly supposed to be good at. And he uses this as an example. He says, one time I had some sort of struggle. He doesn't specify what it is. And he says, over and over and over, I asked the Lord to take it away from me. I asked the Lord to help me just overcome it. But every time the Lord said no, because my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect, or my power is made most visible in your weakness. What is he saying? He's saying, my power actually works all the more clearly through the fact that you are not up to this task, Paul. Paul said, I am not a good preacher or teacher. And the Lord said, yes, you're not. And that's why it glorifies me so much when you accomplish my mission through your terrible preaching and teaching. Paul said, I am not very clever. I am not very polished. I'm kind of socially awkward and weird. And the Lord said, yes, you are. Correct. And it glorifies me all the more when I accomplish my mission through somebody who is unclever, unpolished, awkward, and weird like you. That makes me feel better. But the same thing is true for us as fathers. What glory does God get if a seemingly flawless man stands up and does a seemingly flawless job as a father, and as a result raises seemingly flawless kids that everybody else looks at and says, I wish I could be like him. I wish my kids could be like his, but I can't and they can't because him and that whole family, there's some kind of other species, apparently. What glory does God get from that? Nothing. 100% of the focus in that situation is on you, the seemingly flawless father. You get glory out of that. But that is not the game that we are playing, because the Lord does not share his glory. You know what glorifies the Lord? It's when an extremely normal dad like you is a tool in his hands to transform your kids, transform your family, transform the world through the small and weak and seemingly insignificant work of fatherhood that you do day in and day out. That's what glorifies God. His grace is sufficient in the way it redeemed you. His grace is sufficient in the way it now transforms you. His grace is sufficient in the way it then empowers you. And His power is made visible. It's made unmistakable through the fact that you and I are weak, and yet He works strongly through weak vessels like us. And as a result, so many of you shared in your responses that the biggest turning point in your life was when you started to get that. The biggest turning point in your life as fathers came about the time you stopped expecting perfection from yourself and instead just started focusing on faithfulness. You said, I'm not going to try to be perfect. I'm just going to try to be as faithful as I can in the place that I am, with the family that I have, in the life that I have. And I'm not going to worry beyond that. I'm going to let that be enough. I'm going to let the Lord be enough despite the fact that I'm not enough. And I'm going to allow the Lord to use that to teach me that I don't have to be enough. The people who told me that I did are lying or stupid liars. With all of that in mind, you shared that as hard as the process of learning that has been, the Lord has been teaching you and growing you and blessing you through it. You said, as hard as all of these things have been, the Lord's been teaching and growing and blessing you through it. Here's what I'm talking about. One, you said that realizing that at your very best, you will still never live up to society's expectations has taught you to value your family over your achievements, because the achievements will not ever be enough. To value your kids over your accomplishments, because your accomplishments will never be enough, but your kids will absolutely be enough. To value the ways that you can give them your time rather than the ways you give them more things. That the way that you can give them your presence rather than the ways you can give them more money to inherit. The ways you can give them your very self more than the ways you can give them a bigger house. They do not need a bigger house. They can share a room. It's going to be fine. You do not need to give them more land. They can run around in the streets. Kids have done it forever. Helicopter parents started existing 40 years ago. It's a psyop. You don't need to give them more vacations. You don't need to give them more toys that they're going to forget about in 2 weeks, and on and on and on. The thing they're not going to forget about is you. I can't get the way that one of you put it out of my head. You said, I have learned that success requires sacrifice. But that the most important thing is not to sacrifice the people I'm working hard for. You said, the Lord's been teaching me to make sacrifices for my family instead of sacrificing my family for my goals. Whoever wrote that, I don't know if you're in the room or if you're out of town this week, but whoever wrote that, that was like you punched me in the mouth. I was on an airplane and I was like, I'm going to cry. No, I can't cry. Society will get mad. That's number one. Number two, you said in the same way, the Lord has been teaching me to let go of that desperation that drives me to distance myself from my family. You said the Lord's been teaching me to let go of that anxiousness about the future that drives me to throw myself into overwork, to feel shame at all the ways I wish I was doing better, to avoid my kids, because every time I look at them, I can't help but think of all the things I should be doing, all the ways I wish I could be like that father over there instead of the man that I am today. You said the Lord's been teaching me to let go of all these things by just planting good seeds and then trusting God with the results. Once again, that's an unbelievably valuable piece of wisdom for me to hear as a brand new father. And I'm unbelievably grateful that I get to hear that now as a new father from the hard-won wisdom that you have shared, instead of learning it the hard way over years and years and years. Because I learn most things the hard way. But here's what I thought was incredible. In one response after another, you shared that all these things have actually driven you closer to the Lord in a way you didn't expect. You shared that in this really difficult and sometimes painful learning process, you've slowly discovered that you can bring all these unbelievably hard things to Him rather than draining yourself dry trying to carry them yourself. This was in almost every response that we got. You said, "Fatherhood continually drives me back to prayer." You said, "I find the pressures of fatherhood driving me into the Lord's presence. I find the stresses of fatherhood moving me into seeking God's help in ways I never would have otherwise." You said you were unbelievably blessed when you started to discover that you could bring the wounds left by your own fathers to the Lord and give them to Him, that you could bring your failures and shortcomings as a father to the Lord and give them to Him, that you could bring the daily struggles to try to put your children ahead of yourself to the Lord and give that to Him, that you could bring your desperate desire for your kids to be safe and protected and unharmed to the Lord day after day and give it to Him, that you could bring all those things to Him and let them be His burdens rather than your burdens. It reminded me of Psalm 55:22. It's a famous one. It says, "Cast all your burdens on Yahweh, and He will sustain you." I don't know if you had this psalm in mind when you answered these questions, but you guys basically wrote a sermon on it. You said, "I have spent so much of my life as a father overwhelmed by all these burdens, and yet I've slowly learned that I don't have to be weighed down till my bones break in half, because when I bring the Lord these burdens, He sustains me throughout these burdens and gives me strength to withstand these burdens. And what I find on the other side of it is that He is working in me and through me amidst these burdens, so that rather than breaking me and failing my children, He was working through all of these things together for the good of my children in ways I couldn't even see at the time." Wow. Again, I was reading it on an airplane last night at 10 o'clock. And I was like, okay. Whoever wrote that, I want you to fill in for me at some point. But as a brand new father, that is one of the most helpful things I could ever hear. I'm technically up here relaying the information, but y'all are the ones preaching to me this morning. But we are still not even to the best part yet, because you shared that over years and years of bringing the burdens of fatherhood to the Lord again and again, it has slowly taught you to rely on His grace in a way you didn't understand at the beginning. Know what I'm talking about? You shared that fatherhood has slowly taught you that you can rely on His grace to carry you through the trials and the joys of raising your children rather than working your fingers down to the bone until you self-destruct under the pressure. I don't know about you. My norm is self-destruct under the pressure. What about you? We don't have to do that. You said, one, through the years, I've slowly learned that God's grace is actually greater than my mistakes as a father, that my mistakes cannot nullify His grace working through me. You said, 2, I've slowly learned that I can trust that God can and will still work through an imperfect father like me. You said, 3, I've learned to just admit when I have failed as a father and asked the Lord to help me do better and then just let that be it. 4, you said that in all of this, I've slowly learned that God's presence will gradually make me a better father and a better man. And the result of all this is that you can have peace. That was the major theme throughout the many things that you wrote to us. You said that the Lord has taught you how to be at peace as a father. But you said that peace came from a very specific place. You shared that as you've learned to rest in God's grace as a father, you slowly discovered the freedom of trusting the Lord with your children instead of feeling the never-ending pressure of trying to micromanage them into a positive future. As I read through your responses, one of the things that stuck out to me more than anything else is how many of you said some version of this. You said that fatherhood has slowly taught you to surrender control and place the people you love the most into God's loving hands. I actually love the way that a lot of you worded this. I'm combining a few together for the wording here, but 1, you said that you slowly learned to trust the Lord with your children because you've gradually come to truly trust that He loves your children more than you do. That's not my wording, that's one of y'all's wording. You said you've learned to trust that He has the answers when we do not, that He can guide your children better than you can. 3, you've learned to trust the Lord with your children because He can be with my children even when I cannot, that He will watch over your children in ways that you can't. 4, you said you've learned to trust that even though you cannot protect your children from everything, you do not need to protect your children from everything. Whoever gave you that assignment was lying to you because the Lord has your children even when they are hurting. He's holding your children even when they are struggling. He's caring for your children even when they are in pain, and He's got a plan and a purpose for your children and with your children, even when it feels in the moment like the worst has come. And 5, you said you've learned to trust the Lord with your children because you've learned to see them as gifts from the Lord. That He created your children as gifts, and now He sustains your children as gifts. He cares for your children as gifts. He will not let the gift that is your children simply wither into nothing for no reason. And the result of learning to trust the Lord with your children has been the kind of peace that actually does change everything. Because what all of this means is that you can rest. That you can stop striving. You shared that once you began to accept that you can bring the burden of fatherhood to the Lord, rely on His grace to carry you and empower you in it, and trust Him with your children throughout every stage of your fatherhood journey, you realized that the pressure was actually not on you. It's not supposed to be on mom either. And that made everything become lighter. And in a weird way, it made everything become sweeter. Here's what I'm talking about. You said, 1, looking back, the thing I treasure most is just watching my children grow up. You said the thing I treasure most is just seeing my daughter become a young woman. You said the thing I treasure more than anything is daddy-daughter dances, hunting trips with my son, special traditions with my kid. 2, you said I expected responsibility, but I didn't expect the depth of joy that comes from simply being a dad. He said, I didn't expect the blessing of being a father. I didn't expect the joy of getting to know my daughter and my son as people. 3, you said, I didn't expect the joy of watching each of my children develop their own unique gifts and abilities to literally enjoy just how different my kids are from each other. One person wrote, I like that child 1 is very different from child 2. They didn't say child 1, child 2, but you know what I'm talking about. I like how different child 3 is from child 1 and 2, and I'm pretty sure child 4 is an alien or something, but I like them too. 4, you said, I didn't realize just how much I would enjoy how the time that we spend together actually changes at every stage. I didn't get this one at first. I had to read on. You said, I enjoy how different it is to spend time with them at 12 than it was to spend time with them at 8, how different that was from spending time with them at 3, how different that was from spending time with them when they were babies, and on and on and on. What all of this reminded me of was Psalm 127, verse 3. It's that famous verse that says, behold, children are a heritage from Yahweh. The fruit of the womb is a gift or a blessing or a reward. You said, I've slowly come to see my children as a gift and a blessing and a heritage and a treasure from the Lord. You said, because I can trust the Lord with my children and rely on His grace in my fatherly work, the pressure is gone, and I can just treasure the time that I spend with them. I can stop striving to control and start just resting with them and enjoying life with them. I think the common denominator in all of this is that fatherhood changes you. If I had one sentence to summarize all of this, that would be it. Fatherhood changes you. So I'm curious to see how different I'll be in a year, and 2 years, and 10 years, and 20 years, and 80. Well, I'll be dead in 80 years, but or will I? But what pretty much every response that you shared had in common was that all of these things have completely shaped what matters to you. You shared that if there was a brand new dad sitting across the table from you, and there is, it's me. But if there's a brand new dad sitting right across from you, you would want to encourage them in a few really specific ways. You said, 1, it's not about you anymore. It's about them. Just accept that right now. Good advice. 2, you said, here's the number 1 thing I would share with a brand new father. Just love your children with all your heart. Forget about everything else. That's the whole thing. 3, you said the most important thing about fatherhood is not providing things. It is providing your presence, your example, the investment that you make in your children, whatever that looks like in your own life. You said, once I started to get these things, the thing that I truly began to matter to me was just being there. Forget about all the other stuff. What really began to matter to me was just being present in the moment. What really began to matter to me was just spending time together. You said enjoy every moment because they're only little once. You said make every day with them count. That's number 3. And number 4, you said start teaching them about the Lord now. You said what really began to matter to me was raising my children in the church, teaching my children about the Lord. I really like the way one person put it. I'm going to read it. It said, a lot of different things used to bring me joy, but here's the thing that brings me joy now. So when I get to see my children growing in the Lord. He said the thing that brings you joy now is when you get to see your children experiencing the joy of the truth, growing into disciples of Jesus. And you said the way that you do that is by treating every moment around your children as important. You said they are watching you, they are listening to you, they are learning from you, whether you realize it or not. Now, on the airplane, that sounded scary. But I think what that actually means is that you have more opportunities to bless them and teach them and grow them than you ever realized without ever having to lecture them. I'm sure you will have to lecture them. But what it reminded me of was 3 John 1:4. John says, I have no greater joy than this, to hear about my children walking in the truth. Now remember, I am one of those brand new fathers sitting across the table from you, and so I want you to know I'm actually listening to you. I read this, the first handful of responses that came in a couple of weeks back, and it actually changed the way that I spent time with my 9-month-old baby, which is still not saying much. He's 9 months old, right? But I started going out of my way to maximize the amount of time I could spend with him rather than minimize it. Started looking for really small, really simple ways I could start teaching him about the Lord right here and right now, even though he still doesn't know English yet. He's 9 months old. At 9 months old, most babies only know French, common knowledge, right? But I literally started reading one of the Baptist catechisms to my baby every day. I started talking to him about kind of key verses every day. I started reading him quotes from the great theologians and Bible teachers and history every day. Now again, 9 months old, feels kind of silly, feels dumb doing it, literally reading to a dude who can't walk yet. And it's like, okay, here's what Charles Spurgeon said. And yet, even when it feels silly, it's beautiful. Because with all of these insights that you have shared with new fathers like me come together to teach us is that God's power is working through us in our fatherhood. That's true about you. God's power is working through you in your fatherhood. Your efforts as a father are part of how God does what he is doing. In Isaiah chapter 40, verse 11, he says, the Lord will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather his lambs in his arm and carry them on his chest. He will gently lead those who have their young. The running theme in all of this is that fatherhood happens by God's grace and through God's power, not through our strength, not through our perfection. And that means, fathers, you can rest. Happy Father's Day. If you would, let's respond to the Lord through song together. If you would stand with me, let's sing together to the Lord.